US senators are pushing for a bill to slap new sanctions on Iran. The legislation requires further reductions in Iran's oil exports and would apply new penalties on other industries if Iran fails to reach a final deal with the West over its nuclear program. Though the White House has threatened to veto the bill, Tehran has warned any new sanctions would kill the Geneva Agreement with the P5+1. On this edition of The Debate, we're asking why US lawmakers are discussing fresh sanctions on Tehran when negotiations are ongoing towards a final resolution of the dispute over Tehran's nuclear energy program. Stay with us.
The US president has said yes, but the Congress insists on the big no. Last November, 6 countries, the US, Russia, China, Britain, France and Germany, reached a deal with Iran on its nuclear program. Barack Obama's administration has said it supports the agreement, but American lawmakers aren't at all content. Now the Senate has new sanctions bill on the table. It was introduced late December and had 26 votes, but now, according to some reports, 48 out of 100 senators are backing it. The motion, called the Nuclear Weapons-Free Iran Act, has been prepared by Democrat Senator Robert Menendez and Republican Mark Kirk, who are known to have close ties with Israel. The bill seeks to cut 30% of Iran's crude sales within a year and to zero within 2 years. All this if Iran violates the Geneva deal. The bill faces a strong block of opposition from both inside the Congress as well as outside. The White House says it will veto it. A bipartisan group of senior foreign policy experts has urged the Senate not to pass the new sanctions. They say penalties could move the US closer to war. The Senate's fierce push for fresh sanctions has drawn Iran's warning. Tehran says any new sanctions put the Geneva deal in jeopardy.
If any new anti-Iran sanctions are passed in the US Congress, they will in fact put an end to the current negotiations. Such measures go against good faith, confidence building and the path of current agreement and talks.
Moreover, the US Commerce Department has stopped the transfer of 2 Boeing airplane engines to Iran. In its statement, the department has banned the Turkish 3K Aviation and Logistics Company from sending the aircraft engines to the Iranian cargo airline Puya Air. The order will remain in place for 180 days. American officials say the Turkish firm tried to export the engines to Iran without the US authorization. The order has been issued because of an imminent violation of export regulations. The second-hand engines will be used in Boeing passenger planes, but US authorities haven't provided any clear-cut explanation why they've prevented the transfer. The US sanctions have hit average Iranians, especially the patients. As a result of banking sanctions, patients with chronic illnesses have rarely gotten the medicine they need. Their misery has prompted a campaign against medicine sanctions on Iran. The campaign, called the Popular Protest, has won the support of Iranian luminaries, artists and activists. They will send a petition on postcards to UN General Secretary Ban Ki-moon. The sanctions, either the extension of the existing ones or the slapping of new measures, will undoubtedly affect the nuclear deal, as the agreement is yet to be implemented. The question that begs to mind at this point is why the US Congress is pushing ahead with further sanctions, which they know can have detrimental impact on the Geneva deal.
You're watching The Debate. Joining us now live from Tehran is University of Tehran Professor Mr. M.Marandi. We are expecting another guest from the US to join the debate as well. But let's start with Professor Marandi here in Tehran. Now, Ms. Marandi, what is the need for the discussion and imposition of new sanctions on Iran by US lawmakers while Tehran and the 6 powers are holding expert-level talks to implement their deal?
Well, obviously, there's no need for new sanctions, as there was never any need for sanctions in the first place. The sanctions are, of course, illegal, immoral, directed at ordinary Iranians. The intention has been to devastate the lives of people in the country, to prevent trade, to prevent businesses from functioning, and even preventing the country from easily importing medicine and foodstuff. So obviously, not only are the sanctions useless, but they're also a threat to the well-being of ordinary people and a violation of fundamental rights of ordinary Iranians. But I think the major issue here is that regardless of the nature of the sanctions and the behavior of the United States government, the question that is being raised in Tehran is whether the United States government is a partner or is a reliable partner in the discussions. If Obama fails to prevent new sanctions from being implemented, it shows that he's a weak president and he's not worth talking to. And therefore the Iranians don't have anyone to talk to on the American side. On the other hand, if Obama allows the sanctions to go through, or if somehow he is quiet and accepting, then it shows that, again, he's untrustworthy, unreliable, and therefore, again, there's no one to talk to in the United States. It will damage the United States. It will show to the international community, again as before, that not only is the ball in the American court, but that the United States is not sincere in its dialogue with the Iranians. So though it would lead to a lose-lose situation at the negotiating table, in the long run it would be more hurtful to the United States than it would be to Iran, the collapse of the negotiations.
Mr. M.Marandi, if I could just jump in here to the issue of trust between Iran and the US, or Iran and the P5+1 as a whole, what people call Iran and the West. Those who are speaking from the other side, from the side of the P5+1, I mean, are saying that Iran says it doesn't trust the US, but the US or those lawmakers who are calling for sanctions are saying the same thing. They say that they cannot trust Iran, and they're saying that they have concerns because Iran, they say, is apparently expanding its uranium enrichment program even now.
Well, the Iranians have already curbed their peaceful nuclear program. Iran has halted enrichment at 20%, which was, by the way, forced upon Iran in the first place to enrich uranium at 20% because the United States prevented Iran from importing the nuclear fuel for the Tehran reactor that produces medical isotopes for cancer patients. But Iran has now produced enough fuel for the next number of years, I think 4 years from what I understand. And as a result of the negotiations, the Iranians have halted the enrichment of uranium at 20%. So the Iranians are showing good faith in the talks. Mm-hmm. Besides that, we all know that there has never been any evidence whatsoever that Iran's nuclear program has been anything but peaceful. The IAEA has never provided evidence to show that there has been a military element to the Iranian nuclear program. Russian and Chinese intelligence sources and agencies have said that the Iranian nuclear program is completely peaceful. Even the United States intelligence organizations, the 16 intelligence organizations, have repeatedly stated that Iran's nuclear program is peaceful. So when the United States has no evidence, when the IAEA has no evidence whatsoever, when no intelligence agency has evidence, then that shows that they have no legitimate right to punish Iran for something that Iran has not done. And if we look at history, we see that Iran, for example, during the Iran-Iraq war, when the United States not only, and the EU or EEC countries at the time, not only did they help Saddam Hussein produce chemical weapons, they also, especially the Americans, helped Saddam use them through satellite intelligence, through satellite information. And in addition to that, the United States actually instructed its diplomats to blame Iran for Saddam Hussein's chemical attacks. While the Americans were involved in mass murder and the usage and production of weapons of mass destruction against ordinary Iranian civilians and Iraqis, the Iranians did not produce or use chemical weapons during the Iran-Iraq war. So the Iranians, who have had clean hands throughout the history of contemporary Iranian history, throughout the history of the war and after the war, they have much greater credibility when talking about weapons of mass destruction than does the United States, which has helped rogue regimes like Saddam Hussein produce and use chemical weapons.
Well, right now, looking at the situation at hand, Mr. M.Marandi, Iranian lawmakers, we know, have been readying a bill that would oblige the government to enrich uranium to 60%. They say if Iran is hit by new sanctions. And just recently, the Foreign Ministry said that the negotiations will end, the deal will be annulled in case of new restrictions. What are the implications? Does this mean that sanctions, if they're imposed, will create a new standoff that would take even more years to be resolved?
Well, I think if new sanctions are imposed, this would bring a more rapid end to the sanctions regime, because the international community and independent countries, Asian countries, Latin American countries, African countries, Russia, China and others, they would see the American position as being an irrational one and based on impeding progress at the negotiating table. And that would create an incentive for them to improve relations, and including trade relations with Iran. I think the Iranian parliament made the right choice, because basically what it is doing is saying that the United States Congress cannot use sticks here. The Iranian government and the 5+1 have agreed upon a plan of action. The 5+1 includes the United States, and the Americans have to stick to that agreement. If the United States fails to do so, then the Iranians will use their own sticks. The Iranians can legitimately produce enriched uranium at 60%. It has that right to do so according to